Hey y'all, welcome back to Database School. Today's episode is with Gajus from Contra.com. He's the co-founder and CEO of Contra, and this one took a turn for the great. I was gonna say took a turn for the good. This interview took a turn for the great. We started out by talking about building the world that you want to live in, specifically as it relates to Slonik, his Node.js Postgres client. It's a very interesting client that has runtime assertions for type safety. So we talk a lot of technical stuff, and then we get into building like a high ownership, high agency engineering culture. And I'll tease this for you. We talk about Loom-driven development and how that helps engineers merge their own PRs. Fascinating discussion, delightful guy. I think you're gonna love this. Please make sure that you tell your friends and your enemies about the podcast. And now let's get to the show. I am here today with Gajus Kuizinas. He is the CTO and co-founder of Contra, which we're going to talk about a little bit, but we have a lot of great philosophical and technical stuff to talk about as well. But Gajus, do you want to introduce yourself a little further?
That was a great intro. Gajus Kuizinas, CTO, co-founder of Contra. That's what I usually say, yeah.
Perfect. And how did I do on the pronunciation? I practiced beforehand. Did I get it?
You did perfect.
Yes, perfect.
10 out of
Okay,
10.
so before we get all philosophical about creating the world we want to live in, tell me, besides having an amazing domain, what does Contra do?
Contra is a talent marketplace. It's a no-commission marketplace, one of the kind. And as a result, we evolved into this hybrid of a talent marketplace and a talent professional network. That is what Contra is in a nutshell.
And it's Contra.com, which is why I said amazing.
It's Contra.com.
That is hard to come by. Tell me, who, you said it's one of a kind, so there's going to be some caveats here. Who would you most closely compare it to? Like, what's the other like talent marketplaces that people would be familiar with?
It's hard to do these comparisons because when you remove the commission model, the entire way the platform works is fundamentally different. The job to be done, like what typically people would seek for, would be the traditional talent marketplaces like Upwork, maybe Fiverr, those kind of marketplaces. But when you remove the commission, all the dynamics of how you contact people, how you talk to people, how you create a project changes because there's no walled garden anymore. So that's why I'm very careful about saying, like, we're the new something,
right?
Because it's it feels very different the moment you visit it.
Fundamentally different. Okay, and this is not what we're here to talk about, but it is interesting. So, who goes on there? Is it designers, developers, same kind of like technical folks that go on there to find contracts, or what?
We picked the hardest path possible. So we went vertical agnostic. So everyone, graphic designers, video editors, software engineers, 3D developers, and etc. It's very, very broad. Now, the thing that makes it an extra unique is that because of all these dynamics that change on the platform, we've also managed to partner with pretty much every major creator tool that you can think of. So Canva, Framer, Webflow, you name it, they're official partners of Contra. And they host their talent networks on Contra. That's what makes us very, very unique.
Okay, so not only is the commission thing unique, but you are basically the trusted resource. So like if I go to framer.com or something like that and I'm like, hey, I need a Framer person, they're gonna send me out to some either branded or like vetted portion of Contra that says like, go to Contra and find your Framer person.
That's exactly it, yeah.
Hey, that's pretty cool. Very clever. All right.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, not what we're here to talk about, but that is very interesting. So what we are here to talk about is I got an email from one Gajus that said, hey, one of my engineers listens to the show and loves the podcast. So first of all, your engineers sound like geniuses. I gotta say,
he's amazing.
You know, yeah, must be. And you gave me a little pitch, which for the dear listener, this is how you get on the show. I just want to hear from interesting people. And so if you're an interesting person, send me an email. And one of the things that caught my eye was you talk about an open source project named, I'm guessing Slonik or Slonik? How do you
Slonik,
say
yeah.
that? Slonik, which I had to look up, which has
Okay.
an interesting etymology itself, the name
Yeah.
Slonik, which we can talk about. And then you said, building the engineering world we want to live in, not the one that others dictate. And I was like, yeah, let's talk about that. So describe to me what this project is, and kind of like let's wax philosophical about why you said you pitched that particular quote.
First of all, I want to give credit where credit is due. I only give credit to one engineer for recommending the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
This topic is also from another engineer in our team. I asked, like, if I were to go on a
What the
podcast,
heck?
like,
What a
what would
great
represent
team.
me accurately? Like, what's the first thing
Uh-huh.
that comes to my mind? And that was the number one thing that came, like the mentality around building the world in which we want to live. And a lot of this has to do with the simple fact that within Contra, and obviously in previous ventures, but Contra is kind of the biggest thing that I've built to this date, a vast majority of the softwares that we're using are either the things that I've initiated as open source libraries or the things that we're actively contributing to. And that just feels very special, like to work in the environment that is shaped by your ideas rather than following the conventions. And I think it, as a result, evolved into a very unique culture within the organization too.
And so what kind of world do you want to live in? And what kind of when you look at the world and you're like, hey, this is a fine world, but I need to invent Slonik because this is not the world I want to live in. So let's talk about that one specifically. Like, what was the impetus there?
We have to go many years back. Like, why did Slonik emerge as a need? And that goes to the origins of my career, which was I was a consultant for many companies, meaning I was kind of the special ops guy. I would have a high rate. I would go in the company. I would fix whatever the issues they have. I move to the other company and jump kind of every 3 to 6 months to new gigs. I really enjoyed that part. And one of the things along the way that always upset me was I come to this company. They would use Node.js, but every time I would need to learn this new API how to interact with the database. And it was just like killing me. Like I'm not going to name specifics. I've been burned by that before. There's just these like query builders, ORMs, object relationship mappers, and whatnot. And every time a problem is somehow in the performance, and the DBA cannot really help because they don't really understand what's the this API. So there's this weird communication barrier happening back and forth. Like, if you want my help with the query, give me the query. I cannot code, kind of thing. Keep in mind, like many years back, a lot of things have evolved since. But the fundamental...
Yeah, give us a time frame. What time frame are you thinking? What era of technology is this?
The beginning of Node.js, literally the first years of Node.js. I kind of
Okay.
rode the wave of when Node.js landed and kind of started to appear in the job boards. I remember applying to the first one, claiming I'm an expert. I miserably failed the first opportunity because I had just no idea of like how to even code in Node.js on the first gig, but I've learned in a very rapid way. And then just started going from company to company.
Okay, so we're talking, I just looked it up quickly. It's we're talking like early 10s. So it looks like Node came out in 2009, and so we're talking either 2009, 2010, 11. So yeah, these are early days. So everything you're encountering is bespoke at that point.
Everything is very early, like you're still familiarizing. And there is also, in a lot of these organizations, funny enough, there was a period of transition from PHP to Node.js, because it's kind of like, the faster, better, architected for those use cases, especially in streaming and whatnot. So it was definitely like a period where everyone's kind of like figuring things out. But the patterns were in a large part directly translated from what used to work in PHP. And that, like, fundamentally the same problem exists in every language, in my opinion. And like the fundamental of the thesis was like, you have SQL, which is this, I'm going to call it perfect language for interacting with databases.
I will allow that. That's great. You can call that perfect. That's fine. Careful talking about PHP, but calling SQL perfect, I'm cool with. That's great.
Good. We're on the same page. It's something that's been standardized for, wait, was it a year? It's over 50 years, right?
I think so.
Yeah,
yep.
I think it's over 50 years. And so you have this large pool of people who are perfectly capable of understanding how to read it, how to analyze it, how to troubleshoot it. But then for whatever reason, you write this abstraction on top of it. And and you make these claims like, oh, it's going to be faster, it's going to feel more native to the application, it's going to be safer. Those arguments like always just really, really bothered me because it's not fundamentally faster. It's definitely not faster. It's not easier to troubleshoot. There's this learning curve every time that you have to familiarize with new DSL, whatever the API is using, and fundamentally, it's not safer. The abstraction, you can argue that like there is merit to an abstraction to avoid you from doing mistakes, but you can achieve those same abstractions if you just stick to the SQL. But the real the thing that allowed to innovate was when Node.js adopted template tags. I want to say that was in 2015. When the template tags came out, they basically allowed you to have something that looks like a string, and in that string reference parameters. But just like in SQL, in behind the scenes of the Postgres, the strings and the parameters are sent separately. So there is no space for the injection. And that was what like pushed me to like, okay, I need to build an abstraction that allows to write SQL using template tags, and that's basically just SQL. And if you look at Slonik today, that is basically just SQL. And so we started with that, but it wasn't an easy path because template tags was at a time very new concept. And man, the amount of emails I got from people saying that what you're proposing, putting variables directly in strings, is super unsafe, and the SQL injections are guaranteed to happen. So there's a lot of misconceptions because as the industry, the number of people are learning about the technology, they have to go through the phase of familiarizing with what this thing is, and sometimes what it appears to be on the surface may not be what it actually is, depending on your level of familiarity. So that's kind of like the very core premise of why Slonik became a thing. But there's also things like, okay, like I've written so many applications and I have opinions about when you're fetching the data, do you want to be strict about it? Do you want to be loose? Kind of like, I expected one row, but I got multiple rows. Like, should I like throw an exception, or should I just kind of like go with it, give you a warning? And over the years, I've became just obsessively of opinion, like the sooner you catch an issue and the more strict you are about the shape of the expectations of the data, the fewer places you're going to fail in unexpected ways. So that was another reason for why Slonik became. And then later, sorry, I'm kind of like not giving you space to ask questions.
This is great. I know. I love the history. This is awesome.
And then later, there's going to be third and fourth waves where Slonik became like the very heated debate, which is that all of these libraries, other libraries, one of their main selling points was, well, we are going to generate you static types to interact with the query, like how you pull the data. And I hated it so much for a very simple reason, because there's multiple layers where the drift can happen. Like one, like you can basically write wrong static types, or the types that are generated are like not representative of the query. And the other one is, even if everything is typed correctly at a time when you're writing this query or generating this query, there's absolutely no guarantees that as you're using the database over time, the underlying schema does not drift. And I saw this over and over and over and over again. And this is where the controversial Slonik change happened, where I said basically from now on, every query that you write has to have runtime checking. And we use Zod for this. So it's introducing this, like, relatively speaking, massive overhead. Like every row has to be validated in real time when you're fetching the data against the schema that you've defined. Lots of people hated it because performance, and now I need to like type out the schema and I understand. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, I want to build the world in which I want to live, which is like I can sleep at night knowing that what I typed out is actually what application is doing. And today, as a working Contra, and we have multiple teams working on different parts of the application, and the schema is constantly evolving and whatnot, the amount of sentry errors that we're getting that's showing drift from the schema that is defined in code versus database, and how this acts as the kind of early warning system that something is about to like not be great if you don't fix this. I do not imagine having built this application without it. Like, honestly, there's just no way. Like this is one of the things that's just keeping our sanity, that the fact that we can constantly rely on very precise data shape to come through the SQL queries. Because otherwise just there's too many people contributing in parallel to make it, safe.
So go ahead.
And then the final one, I promise. This is not even slimy, but
hey, it makes my job easy when the guest has interesting things to say. So I'm just hanging out. You keep going.
I promise this is the final one. And this is not even me. This is a shout out to someone else. There is a project called SafeQL. I don't know if you've encountered it before, but it fundamentally became kind of like the last missing piece of wonderful developer experience for us, where we can still write raw SQL, but this SafeQL library, which is ESLint plugin, it is able to extract the SQL that you wrote and run checks in the background using linting against the database schema to make sure that as you're typing things, the names and the types and everything is aligned and it matches your runtime types. And it's just this like beautiful experience where I write raw SQL that's composable SQL. That's another topic we can cover later. And I have real-time type checking on both runtime and as I'm typing in my IDE.
Wow. Okay. So I'm going to try to synthesize because you said a lot of very interesting things there. So I'm gonna give the one sentence about from the Slonik GitHub. A battle-tested Node.js Postgres client with strict types, detailed logging, and assertions. And so that's basically all the stuff that you've just described. I assume the assertions are those runtime type checks. You assert everything. And so I think if I'm understanding correctly, the problem that you set out, one of the problems you set out to solve here is a problem that is common to man, as we might say, which is you set up your application, and your application believes that the database schema is set up in a certain way. And in the beginning, that may be true, right? That may be true. As we're running migrations or, God forbid, altering tables, just, cowboy coding, let's say very, very, very basic example, a column goes from non-nullable to nullable, right?
Exactly.
And your application code isn't aware of that, and suddenly your strict typing is strictly wrong. And so now you could be getting these nulls back because the business rules changed, which is fine. That's how businesses work. Schemas change, data models change. That's totally fine. And so Slonik set out to say, hey, we are going to assert that there are no nulls here because I'm telling you as the application developer that my schema doesn't allow nulls. And then when the schema changes separately from the application code, that assertion is still alive, which makes you take a positive action. It's just like, we're not going to let it slide through. You have to either decide, is the schema wrong or is the application code wrong, because they are no longer in sync. And I don't care which one you change, but you got to change one of them. Is that fair so far?
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Okay. And one of the great ironies of this story is you started out by saying how frustrating these abstractions are, and then you went on to write your own. But I will allow you. You did that because, if I recall correctly, the introduction of a new language feature. So a new language feature, these tag template literals came along and enabled you to build up the experience that you wanted. And so all these other things were not quite hitting this developer experience. And then a new feature came along and you're like, hang on, this unlocks a lot of stuff. And then we fast forward, 10, 11 years now, this thing has over 1,000 releases. So it's been alive for a long time. And now we've got this Zod, runtime checking, or the SafeQL ESLint plugins. And so now we've really built it up to where it's this like very very strict operating environment, which I agree helps me sleep at night. Not this one in particular because I don't use it, but the idea of knowing like my data layer is solid and my application can trust that is very very comfortable to me. So I agree with that. Is that synthesis mostly correct about the history and kind of like the why you did this?
The 90%, actually 100% is. The one thing I want to clarify, the Slonik does not invent any syntax. The assertions happening are outside of the query. The actual query is just plain SQL, absolutely zero modifications to it. So if you were to look at it, you could just copy it like directly to your SQL client. You can just run it. So that's one important distinction. Yeah.
And then when the result set comes back, you have the assertions run on the result set when it comes back.
Correct. Yeah.
So one of the reasons I want to talk about this runtime validation, but you said something at the end there, which I found very interesting. One of the reasons that I like the abstractions is I agree that SQL is amazing and they did a great job somehow from the jump on getting SQL to be pretty great. But in the end, like when we're working with it on the application side, it's strings, right? We're writing, select from, and that like you could have a query builder that's basically objects that just do strings, but you said that like it's composable. And
Yeah.
so what were you talking about when you said it was composable? Can you describe that in more detail?
So if you think about SQL templates, they're actually objects, and the tag templates, they're actually objects, and those objects can have different attributes. They can describe things like, what is this? Is this a SQL fragment? Is this a value bind, or whatever it is? So when you type out a query in Slonik, it's effectively a SQL object that if you took another SQL fragment and you put it inside of that, it will basically just merge it. So it's kind of like it will like interpolate the string, and then it will figure out how to renumber the parameter binds to make sure that like the new constructed SQL is working as expected. In other words, like if you think about the typical SQL building cases where you would say like, I don't know, if this parameter is true, then add this where condition or something like this. You can do exactly that by just simply creating a SQL tag that says where something equals this, and you add the variable that you want to bind there, and just throw that in a query and have it dynamically either injected or not injected into that SQL fragment. And the end result is like you're still composing like a raw SQL from raw fragments, but you get you basically see the actual query and you get all those validations that I was talking about because you can calculate all the branches of like how the SQL can be interpolated. You basically get a validation that the query is right as you're doing this, which I just think that there's literally, if you had me dream better DX, I could probably not think of it.
Well, I mean, hopefully not, because this is your project, and hopefully this is the embodiment of everything that you've ever dreamt of, which it sounds like it is.
But the biggest hurdle though is like even now, the amount of misconceptions about like how this works. Like to this day, I get a lot of emails saying like what you're doing is unsafe or whatever. And I always take time either to I usually write an article about it and then send back to the person. Like there's like a new topic, like hey man, like this is hopefully like a gentle intro explaining how it works. Yeah, I used to be a cocky teenager. I would offer people money to say like if you find a bug in this, I'll give you $1,000 or whatever, So I would really challenge anyone that would basically describe it as a risky solution.
Yeah, I remember there was I think it was a Next.js conference, and they did it was like a SQL, tags literal or whatever we're calling it, and everybody was like, "Oh, SQL injection!"
Yeah, exactly.
And that thing that slide went viral, and I was like, I'm not even a Node person, but I can tell that like this is not just string interpolation. But I do remember it went yes.
And so imagine like the battle for the
I
last.
can't. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And I think that is one, that's testament to people online like to dunk, but two, that's testament to the growth of the JavaScript community, the continued growth of the JavaScript community, that there are always new people coming in. And that's a
Yeah,
healthy thing, that like
it
the
is.
community is continuing to grow, which means it's like what do they call it? Eternal September. Like there's always new students coming in, and every September it's like, oh, everything's changing. And so I think that's probably the root of it. So these types, if we're being super strict about making sure, not making sure that it doesn't get skewed, because that's going to happen, but making sure we know when it gets skewed so we can fix it. Talk to me about the developer experience of, we can use a users table for example. Talk to me about defining those types in the application side. Is that originally, or like at the beginning, is that code generation, and then it dumps it into your app and you're responsible for maintaining it? Because if it's always code generation, then the sands are just shifting underneath you. So like how do you declare these types for a user table such that you are alerted in the middle of the night when the when the schema changes, you know?
Yeah, so the moment you write the query, you basically start out by writing the query and then immediately defining the schema. Now, there are abstractions, to your point, community contributed, that kind of generate it in real time as you're typing, based on the things you're typing. I think they're great, but it's honestly not that big overhead, and it kind of helps you to think through the contract that you want to have between the application and the query. So we find it.
Wait, hold on. So am I to understand correctly that I was I describing this incorrectly, where I was saying you define the schema of the table, and what you're saying is when I write the query, I also write what I expect to get back in that result set?
For every query.
Got it. Okay. That makes a lot of sense, because obviously you can do anything in a query. Okay, sorry. Carry on.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
you write the types you expect to get back for that query.
Yeah, and maybe like even taking a few steps back, like something that prompted this was I was helping another startup. They were having issues scaling their organization, and obviously, like there was a bigger push towards like more testing, integration testing, and whatnot. And one thing that really caught my eye was just like how many times they would write tests that theoretically were not possible based on their static types. I was like, why are you disabling TypeScript in this scenarios to like write these tests? And the answer was something like, oh, we had cases where the database shifted, or like a condition was added to like a left join that basically made it like whatever less likely to be, to be the data to be available. So the experience that we have at the moment is you write the query, you write the validation schema for it, and then because it's Zod, I don't know if you're familiar with Zod, Zod automatically infers the static types from the validation schema that you wrote. So from that point on, everything that trickles down from the query into the rest of the application, you can be 100% confident that it will either not, that if it goes to that further to the code, it's going to be accurate in matching the schema, or we'll never get to that point, because the query as it runs, it will detect like, well, I was expecting this, but something else came. So like, boom, an error. Now, because it still generates the static types, and because we're able to, we have static types for the entire database, we're able to also the build time catch if there's a drift of like what you wrote in the validation versus what's at the time when you're deploying it is in a database. But as I mentioned, like you cannot really trust even the database schema 100% depending on how the query is written, because queries can have procedures, queries can have conditional branches based on some enums, and especially in those more complex queries where if the object being returned is a person, then I expect these parameters. If an object being returned is a company, profile entity, then I expect these properties. Especially in those cases, those contracts that you define with runtime validation are exceptionally useful, because so many things go wrong, like as the application progresses. On day zero, I just want to double down. On day zero, everyone is happy with whatever the solution, because everyone remembers the entire schema, everyone knows how everything works, etc. It's when you go down 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and more people join the organization, and unexpected things are being contributed, and requirements come in, and yada yada. So it's really about how to build something that scales well with the organization. And you also asked, what's the developer experience? So just clicking on that, basically we have the highest priority assigned in Sentry when we see a drift. Drifts happen fairly rarely, and they're usually indicative of something we didn't think through when defining the schema. Like we didn't think through of some conditional branch or something. And in those cases, yeah, we just prioritize going redeploy based on new understanding on what the data is being returned or correcting the underlying data.
So if I were to extract a philosophy from this, it sounds like the philosophy is, if you're gonna fail in like a known and very loud way versus a subtle and unknown way. Is that fair?
100%. I mean, okay. What are the alternatives? Like, fail gracefully and allow the transactions to go through, and, allow like partial corrupted data to be stored further down the line. It's not great. It's the same principle of why we have transactions. You want that integrity, that safety of mind, that everything that you've planned to do is going to be completed in that step, and it's not going to be like halfway through.
And so you're talking about scaling the engineering organization, the team. I would probably throw in there scaling the complexity of the app. The more that you're like writing these report queries that, aggregate a bunch of data and coalesce and join and case and CTE, like, it's getting more complicated. My question for you is like, how is it scaling up? How is the performance scaling up? Because you mentioned very early on that runtime checking that spins through all those results, and so give us a sense of what the team shape and size looks like. Anything you want to share, number of employees, anything like that. And then give us a sense of like the performance of the application and how, what trade-offs you're making there. Because I imagine there are some trade-offs that you have deemed worth it, but give us a sense of both of those scales that y'all are operating at.
So I'm thinking from which end to address this. First of all, let's address the team. We have a small but mighty team. We have 10 engineers at the moment. We have very unique engineering culture. Another podcast episode where we allow people to self-review the code, self-deploy the code, and we've designed very, very specific ways of how to do this to mitigate any risks. So that's the size of the team, and we're serving 1.5 million users. Like, users are on the talent marketplace that are actively, hiring folks and whatnot. So very small engineering team for the size of the marketplace and the volume of transactions we're processing. Now, so fundamentally, I want to give credit to who it was. Man, this has been many years though back. One of my CTOs in the past told me that scaling hardware is cheap, scaling people is hard. So like, anything that you can do to increase the efficiency of the people that you have of the team while not increasing the size of the team is going to be worth it. Whether that's direct compensation, whether they're just buying better MacBooks, whatever you think, it's just worth it. And I very firmly believe in that. So if it means that I can create a developer experience for our team that allows them the sanity of writing the most minimal code that guarantees the safety and integrity of the code, and that means buying more servers to support this infrastructure, it's worth it. Like, I don't even question this. It's just like worth it, no matter how we slice or dice. In terms of like, what is the actual impact? Because I think it's worth quantifying it. We do regular profiling of our applications, and we kind of estimate that Zod accounts for about 20% of all of our performance profile, which is a lot in terms of CPU time, but it's not, it's like, what else should be there? It's one of the most important things, ensuring the integrity of the data. But what does that mean in practice? So 20% more servers allocated to our users. It's not a major cost comparatively. Yeah.
Okay. One, that's awesome that you have that number just like off the top of your head. That gives me a ton of confidence, that y'all have looked at it and said, yeah, this is worth it. And this reminds me very much of the people who know and love Ruby and are not ashamed to be like, Ruby's not the fastest language in the world, but you know what? I'm super productive with it and I love it. And so
Exactly.
we'll add
Yeah.
another server. And it's like,
Exactly.
yeah, so, I buy that argument. That's pretty good. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
so what kinds, like, do you have any, you said most of the critical alerts that you've gotten on this is not actual drift, but like esoteric edge cases that weren't considered in the first place. Do you have any that were like actual drift or like, holy, we never would have caught that, or anything where the database schema changed out from under you? Tell me some stories about like, what has this caught, and what has, like, when did you look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, you genius, you wrote Slonik and this just saved our lives?
Honestly, this happened increasingly rare these days, just because I think of like how used to we are with the platform. But in the first couple of years, oh man, like hundreds of alerts on a daily basis, especially especially when we started rolling out the payments infrastructure. There are so many crazy edge cases, especially because you have these workflows where some of the data depends on external sources that you cannot think through all the edge cases. So like Stripe sends you webhooks, those webhooks store some data in a schema. You define some checks in the schema, but you're still writing the data. And now you're querying and you're preparing to present this information to the user, but suddenly, you did not expect that particular webhook or like a breaking change happened. So I'd say the most frequent, even to this day, situation where we see these like very unexpected alerts is when an external data is involved. Whether we're fetching some API state, synchronizing data with intercom, or any of those variations. Any of that data that gets stored in SQL and that needs to be represented. Now, the other common scenario is because we have a marketplace / professional network, they can take different roles within that infrastructure. I can be a client, I can be a freelancer. Depending on who you are in the particular contract, even though you're dealing with the same entities in the database, how they're represented or like which attributes you're allowed to see are going to be very different. So the sooner you catch those things, the less likely that you're exposing something that you're not supposed to. Obviously, there are layers on top of that, like the GraphQL schema and whatnot, but it goes back to the principle I was talking about. The faster you catch it, the easier it's to debug, understand the source, and fix the issue.
So I heard two common ones in there, neither of which I had thought about. So the first one is, I assume that, like, we're all running more or less basic CRUD apps, right? But you're also consuming a lot of third-party data that comes in, and God love them, third-party providers are great. They are subject to change,
Yeah, of course,
and
yeah.
as much as they try not to, it may be subject to change. And so you're consuming these webhooks, or you're polling, and you're getting a bunch of data, and it's just in the database, totally fine, passes all the check constraints, passes all the column constraints, everything works fine. But something fundamental changes, and you don't pull that out of the database for maybe, days or weeks until somebody's like, I want to go in and look at this, third-party data that came in. And then suddenly it's like, oh, they changed this a week ago, 2 weeks ago, didn't tell anybody, and now we're hosed. That's one that I didn't think about. And then the second one is, I can imagine myself doing this, which is, what I understood you to describe is you have a user entity that is kind of represented in two different ways depending on context, right?
Correct.
So if they're the talent, or if they're the hiring manager or whatever, there may be different attributes. There may be different types of attributes. Columns may represent differently, and I can see myself as a developer being like, oh, I know that a user has a dollar per hour rate or something, and you're like, yeah, but this time they're functioning as a hiring manager and they shouldn't have that. Did you write the right query or something like that? And so it's like it's basically like a familiarity bug. Like, I know what's in the user table, and you're not thinking, well, I'm representing it as entity A or B in this scenario. Is that right?
Well, the other, so yeah, absolutely. And the other one that's honestly the most obvious, just kind of like zoned out there, is effectively every schema that you wrote now acts as a sort of a integration test, because we obviously have thousands, like 3,000 plus integration tests, 7,000 if you count unit tests and whatnot, so crazy number of tests. And so when you define the schema and you run all those tests, they run through every possible user scenario and that we know of, and the most common time where you catch the schema drift is where you didn't consider something in the context of one of those scenarios before it even gets deployed, because the integration test fails. So to your point earlier, like where does this come into the developer experience, is that confidence that given the schema that you've added, given the query that you've added to the database, it will now pass across every integration test that we know of. And then by the time you deploy it, the only scenario where this would like fail somehow is if the user somehow enters the scenario that we didn't consider, or we have third-party data that's like introducing an unexpected variable.
So 7,000 tests. It's a lot of tests.
It's a lot of tests.
You mentioned earlier that you have some things in place such that you have this like high ownership, I'm putting those words in your mouth, but high ownership engineering culture where people can self-assure and then ship. Talk to me about, one, philosophically, why did you, as CTO, why did you set up that type of engineering culture, and what other... so we've got this incredible, database access layer that does a lot of this for us. We've got all these tests. What else are you doing to ensure that culture? But start with, why did you set it up that way?
The answer is pretty simple. When we just started assembling the team, I was obsessed with understanding where can we innovate on the processes within the organization that would allow us to move faster than competition. Like, I fundamentally believe.
How old is Contra?
5.5 years.
5.5 years. Okay, so 5.5 years ago, this was the question. Okay, carry on.
Yeah, we're hiring the team, and keep in mind, we started during COVID, so we were forced into remote organization, which I love, but we were forced into it, like we didn't have any other options. And we kind of have to figure out like what does efficient organization look like, especially like my responsibility being the engineering organization. So I would analyze every step of like how we work, how we collaborate, how we share information with each other. And one thing that became like blatantly obvious is that the most time lost, it happens from people writing this PR, requesting a review, and then waiting for someone to review it. And then there's this back and forth with the other person, like, can you change this code style or something? Like sometimes not even relevant to like the meat and potatoes of the PR, right? So there's a lot of back and forth friction. So I would read these comments and I would like try to shape our guidelines, like try to tell like what things we want to review, what not. But fundamentally, it came down to like this process just does not work. Like the review process is like fundamentally broken. And I was thinking, okay, so can we figure out a process where the review process is a single player process where I do not depend on other people? Now, before I go further, I'll say one thing that's important. It will not work for every organization because we were obsessive about hiring very senior people. So the people that are doing the things that they're doing, they're pretty extremely capable. But long story short, the concept that I came up with and we named it is called Loom-driven development. At the time, Loom was a big driven development.
Loom-driven development. Okay, yeah.
Basically, so for those who don't know, maybe Loom is this app that allows you to, at a press of a button, quickly record a video and get a link to that video. So basically, the way it works is very simple. You wrote a PR, and before you can assign self-review label, kind of self-descriptive, it will allow you to self-review the PR. You, as a pre-check, have to record a Loom. And all that Loom has to do is you open the code changes that you've made, go line by line, explain me the reasoning of why you've done it this way, and then also go to the application and show me you going through the user flows that you expect this to impact and show you how they're impacted, that they're working as expected, kind of doing a smoke test. So it's funny because when we rolled this out initially, it actually became a time drag and like created more friction than initially. And I was like losing my mind. Like, how is it possible? I gave them like I gave everyone means to like self-review code. Like, why is it taking more time? So we started analyzing like what changed. And it turns out that what people would do is they would try to record perfect Loom. So they go through the code review, they record it, and they find a bug and like, damn it, I need to re-record the Loom and go back. And so sometimes an easy PR would take like literally hours to review because you keep re-recording. These days, as our kind of culture evolved, you see this like people recording their Looms, walking through it, and then you just, and you see this pause on Loom where they pause the video and then they unpause it and the code slightly changed and they go through it and as they go through it, like basically they build the confidence that.
So I'll say the implementation maybe has improved, but the system is working as intended.
Yeah, the system is working as intended.
That's the entire
Exactly.
goal. This is a delight. Okay, yeah, keep going.
And the awesome part about it is that obviously it made our ability to ship code at all hours without any blockers by anyone. The only time where we suggest people to do review is if you yourself do not feel 100% confident of the impact of the changes that they're going to have. Oftentimes it's like the ledger payment kind of related, more sensitive parts that people will do this. Scary stuff, like very easy to have sleepless nights as a result. So those are the only times that people ask for review. Or if you're new to the team, you may ask for reviews, just kind of like catch up to the speed. A shout out to CodeRabbit. We like CodeRabbit, where we can like codify those rules that are not easily caught by linting. I'm not sponsored by by not linting, but just like defining human language. Like these are the conventions. Those really help, especially with new onboarding people when you're onboarding new people. But other than that, yeah, people self-review code. And the second layer of beauty, so this increased performance dramatically, but the second layer effect is that now when you run in the bug or you like see some questionable code, and usually you would have some shitty comment message, fixing a bug, you can go click on it and you'll see a loom of someone going through and explaining the logic of like why they've done the code the way they've done, right? And just like the amount of context is like vastly superior to anything that was available before.
Oh, that's clever. So I can go, do the blame, find the PR, go to GitHub, find the PR, and watch my coworker say why that line of code exists. That is interesting. So this to me, this is genius to me because in my line of work, I do a lot of teaching. And I will be halfway through a video trying to explain something and realize, you know what? I don't really understand this that well. I got to turn this freaking thing off and I got to go back and understand this more deeply so that I can say it out loud to the people. And this is that exact same thing. Like when you have to go through line by line, and it's one thing to go through and read it in your head. It's another thing to like lie about it and say, oh yeah, I went through it and read it in my head. It's a third thing finally to go through and say it out loud and like defend it. And that is the highest level of I really understand it because I can explain it to another person.
Absolutely.
I've never heard of this in my life. Have you heard of anyone else doing this?
No, but I hope people will pick it up. I honestly
Loom-driven development. LDD.
LDD, exactly. I just really think it's something that gives us almost unfair advantage in terms of how fast we're moving as an organization. Yeah.
So looms are always required. Reviews are not always required, but they are requestable if you feel like, hey, this is touching payments and I loomed it, but I just want another set of eyes because that's, that's always the most terrifying part of any code base is the payments, the accounting, all of that. You've got this super strict runtime assertion database layer. You hire senior engineers. Are there any other things philosophically that you have kind of put up around to enable this this team of killers? It sounds like. Is there anything else that you've tried to instill as an organization?
I think there's many, to be honest. Like, I think we're pretty unique as an organization. Like how people are involved in different stages of product, like thinking through the product requirements design. Engineers are involved from the very beginnings of it, how we're kind of like thinking through how to implement things, even the communication in Slack. This is the funny thing. Like, this is a hard question to answer because for me, it's been like 5.5 years and all these things we're taking for granted. And the only reason I'm able to talk about it now is because we just onboarded new engineer. And as part of onboarding, I'm asking them, like, hey, what are some of the things that maybe surprised you? And you get this long list. So like, and then you're like, okay, yeah, I forgot. Like, not everyone's doing this. Like, we have specific emoji language in Slack that we're using. The way that kind of like once you make migrations to the database, the way that they are. We generate a lot of assets to help to explain you the impact of the changes that you've made across the application. So there's these like a lot of developer experience improvements. If I may, I would also shout out another tool, GetDX. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but it's like this tool that allowed us to uniquely shape the engineering culture, because fundamentally, I think one of the hardest things to measure is the quality. The performance of the engineering team. Is this like, do you measure the freaking commits and etc.? And I hate that. Like, everyone knows it doesn't work. So like, what's the answer that actually works? And I think that GetDX folks are the only approach I've ever seen in my professional career that feels like they got it close to right. And it uniquely impacted our ability to be aware of the gaps in our organization, and also and fundamentally, just at a very high level, they're not doing anything magic. That's the funny part. It's basically a survey that they send quarterly and then present in a well-formed way that gives you qualitative insights on different parts of what are the biggest blockers in day-to-day flow, what are the biggest things that are introducing inefficiencies, in your day-to-day work, and
they
so forth.
They
and
send
so
it to
forth.
your engineers, and your engineers fill it out, and so then they compile it and give you some sort of report.
Exactly. And then you, as a engineering organization, you sit down and you discuss those reports, and you kind of like build on understanding, okay, what are the things that we have to prioritize to stay ahead of the curve of all the other engineering teams, in terms of how we deploy tools, how we test things, and whatnot.
Oh, I see. So you're getting reports across the industry, or inside your organization.
So both.
See.
So you see like how you basically perform against others, because there's the sky's the limit on how much you can invest in things. But if but you want to see like, what is the sentiment within the engineering organization towards testability or CI/CD speed,
cool.
or the tools we're using, the learning curve, like those kind of things.
Oh, this is very cool. And yeah, I'm glad you didn't say something like number of lines written. I would have been bad news. This is awesome.
It's honestly, it's almost the impossible. It's almost the inverse. It's it's frustrating subject. It's the vibe coding stuff.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll put the link in the show notes, but it's GetDX.com. I assumed it was like GIT, but it's GetDX.com. So you've mentioned two things now. You've mentioned CodeRabbit, which is the AI PR review. You've mentioned GetDX. What is your internal stance on like the code generation tools, any of the LLMs? Like, how are you all, or are you using any of these things to move quickly?
We would need a whole other podcast to talk about it. but I think fundamentally it comes down to like few simple things. One is, at the time of the handover, like for instance, I wrote a PR, or at the time of returning back to the product team for review, like something, where we find AI to be the most useful is take project brief, take these code changes, and see if I potentially overlooked something. Like, tell me, like, don't write any code, but tell me, like, did I potentially introduce something yet? Again, the main thing that I'm optimizing in this is not efficiency per se. It's how many rounds of communication back and forth we're going to have for something to get to the production, for something to be approved, to be completed. If I can reduce this to 0, then we're going to be extremely efficient organization. And that's fundamentally what I'm trying to do. So that's where we use AI the most.
So you have a product team, I assume. You've got like product managers or designers or somebody, or maybe it's you that's writing pitches, specs, whatever you want to call them, and somebody takes those and implements them, and then you have a system, some sort of bespoke or otherwise tool that compares the two to see did we accomplish what we set out to accomplish. Is that close?
Yeah, it's basically taking the code. Like honestly, it's not system; it's just Claude. You just copy the things there and ask. I think someone could productize this, and this is not also a hard requirement. This is more something that I advise to people when I see like a lot of back and forth communication emerge. And nowadays, I see more of this happening naturally without being prompted. I try to not to even define any rules that cannot be enforced. A lot of these things are like happening, because it improves your life quality. So they're like guidance of like how to make things better. Now, in terms of the actual vibe coding on day-to-day in the organization, I don't care what you use. You can write with your feet, whatever, but you're accountable and responsible to the entire team for every single line of code that's added to the code base. That's it. And
you're going to loom it at the end of the day. So if you're going to record your loom, I don't care how you wrote it, but you better be prepared to defend it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's as simple as that. So, if any of the tool that you find gives you extra powers, more power to you, but you're still responsible and accountable. And from practice, I think most of us isn't like the entire engineering culture are finding that it's generally easier to write code than to try to interpret and understand someone else's written code. So, yeah.
Yep. No, I have found that myself as well. I can write with assistance. I can write many thousands of lines very quickly. And then what? So shoot, now I got to look at it all. Okay. So this, we started by talking about a Postgres, query builder, and now we're talking about building efficient and effective engineering organizations. This is awesome. Do you have do you have anything else that we didn't cover? I mean, Loom-driven development, we might have missed that. So if you've got any other secrets like that, now is the time. Do you have anything else you want to cover here?
I might need to follow up with you. I'm kind of tapping out here.
Okay. This is a great time to tap out because this has been fascinating. A lot of times I get into fascinating discussions about, the internals of databases, which I adore, obviously. But this is so interesting to me. So thank you for coming on. Thank you to your engineer for making you come on. I know that you were originally like, I don't know if I have anything to say. I'm sorry. You have so much to say. This is great. So tell the people, give them a full-throated pitch for Contra. Just, no holds barred. This is your moment. Give them a pitch for Contra and then where they can find you online, and then I'll wrap us up.
So once again, Contra is a talent marketplace. We invite all the best engineers, software designers, graphic designers to our platform. Everyone's welcome and no commission. You are welcome to build your identity and keep all the earnings. And you can find me at gajus@contra.com.
Perfect. And is there any request you would have of the audience? Are you looking for open source contributors to Slonik? Are you looking for new engineers? Is there anything that you want to talk to a bunch of database nerds about before we go?
You know what's funny? Like I got asks for database experts, Postgres experts specifically in this case, and I looked at Contra and I couldn't find enough. So if we could attract more people, that would be extremely valuable.
Oh, that's great. So if you're listening and you're like, I know Postgres, I want to make some money, then go to Contra. Get on there. Yeah. Go make some money. Oh, that's amazing. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you again for doing this. This was, like I said, an absolute delight. And, once you come down from the high of being on the podcast, you're like, I got 50 other things I want to talk about. You reach out. We'll schedule it again. This is great.
This is awesome.
So Thank you to all of you all for listening. If you're listening on RSS, just, go subscribe on YouTube. And if you're on YouTube and you're like, why am I watching these two guys? There is RSS. You can just go, databaseschool.com is where you can find everything. And if you're an engineer listening and you're like, hey, my boss is also smart and they should be on a podcast, send me an email. That's how we ended up here today. Nobody has ever paid to be on the show. I reject all PR pitches because those are super annoying. So if you know somebody super smart that you want to hear from, let me know and I will try to get them on the show. Thank you all for listening. Like and subscribe or do something. I'm not really sure. But thank you all for listening. We'll be back soon. And thank you for taking the time to do this.
Thank you so much for having me here.